I've built plenty of things in 63 years. A machine shop that grew into three, a marriage that lasted 31 years until cancer took her, a son I'd walk through fire for. You know what I never built? A tolerance for a woman who moves her whole family into your lake house and calls it a family reunion when what she means is a hostile takeover. But we'll get to Patricia. First, let me tell you about the Tuesday morning I drove up to check on my cabin and found out I'd apparently been running a free hotel for 6 weeks. My name is Frank Kowalski, and if you've got a father-in-law who thinks your generosity has no bottom to it, stick around, because this one's for you. I was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I never left except for the 4 years the Army sent me to Georgia and back. Started as a machinist at 19, opened my own shop at 28, and by the time I turned 50, I had 3 locations and 40 people on payroll who depended on me to keep the lights on. My son Michael is 34 now. Good kid. Better man. Married his college sweetheart, Nicole, 6 years ago, and I'll be honest with you, I liked her from the start. Sharp, funny, worked hard as a physical therapist building her own practice from nothing, same as I did. I don't hold anything against Nicole. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else, because what happened wasn't about her. Not really. It was about her mother, Patricia Voss, Nicole's mother. I'd met her exactly 4 times before all this started, and every single time she found a way to mention my cabin. Not directly. Patricia doesn't do direct. She does it sideways, the way some people compliment your watch, just to let you know they noticed it. That place on Chautauqua must be just gorgeous this time of year. She'd say, at Thanksgiving, at the wedding, at Michael's birthday. I'd nod and say it was nice and change the subject because I've been in business 40 years and I know when somebody's fishing. I bought that cabin 22 years ago on Chautauqua Lake, upstate New York, about 2.5 hours from Erie if the roads are clear. 3 bedrooms, a screened porch that looks straight out over the water, a dock my late wife Diane used to sit on every single evening with a glass of wine, watching the sun go down like it was the first time she'd ever seen it happen. After Diane passed 4 years ago, I kept the place exactly as it was. Didn't rent it, didn't sell it, just went up there myself 6, 8 times a year to sit on that dock and remember what it felt like to have somebody waiting for me at the end of a long week. I'd been thinking about finally opening it up as a seasonal rental. The lake market had gotten hot. Families paying good money for a week in a place like mine, and honestly, an empty house doesn't honor anybody's memory. It just sits there getting older. My property manager up there, a woman named Carol Reyes, who's handled 2 other rentals for me over the years, no nonsense, 20 years in the business, had already lined up a young family from Buffalo who wanted the place for the whole month of July. All I needed to do was drive up, do a final walkthrough, take some updated photos, and give Carol the green light to sign the lease. 2.5 hours from Erie on a clear June morning. I've made that drive more times than I can count, and I know every turn of it, every diner, every spot where the trees open up and you catch your first glimpse of the water. I had the windows cracked, coffee in the cup holder, and I was thinking about whether the dock needed new boards before the Buffalo family moved in. I was in a good mood. A genuinely good mood, the kind I hadn't had much of since Diane died, because doing something productive with that house felt like waking it back up. I turned onto Lakeshore Drive around 11 in the morning. Everything looked normal. Kids on bikes. A guy mowing his lawn 3 houses down. Completely ordinary Tuesday. And then I pulled up to my own driveway and saw 4 vehicles parked along the gravel where usually there's nothing but my own truck and maybe Carol's sedan. A minivan with New Jersey plates. A black Ford Explorer. A Subaru with a bike rack still attached to the back. No bikes on it. And parked half on the grass like whoever drove it had stopped caring about where the driveway ended. A silver Lexus SUV I recognized immediately because I'd seen it in my son's driveway a dozen times. It belonged to Patricia and her husband, Gerald Voss. I sat in my truck for a minute. Just sat there with the engine ticking, looking at those 4 vehicles, doing the math a man does when something doesn't add up right. Then I got out and walked to my own front door, and I could hear it before I even reached the porch. Music. Laughing. Somebody's kid shrieking about the water being cold. The screen door was propped open with a cooler, and I walked through it into my own house. There were 9 people in my cabin. 9. I want you to sit with that number for a second, because I had to. Patricia was out on my back porch in one of Diane's old wicker chairs. the one my wife used to sit in every evening, holding a mimosa and laughing with a woman I'd never seen in my life. Gerald was down at my dock, in swim trunks, grilling on a portable grill that was not mine, burgers going, smoke drifting up over water that used to belong to just me and my memories of Diane. There were 3 kids I didn't recognize cannonballing off the end of the dock, and 2 more women I'd never met, sunbathing on towels laid out on my grass like it was a public beach. And in my kitchen, on the counter, a bottle of my wife's favorite wine, a Riesling I kept 2 bottles of in the cellar and hadn't touched since the funeral, standing open with maybe a third of it gone. Patricia saw me first. She didn't jump, didn't spill her drink, didn't have the decency to look even slightly caught. Her face just opened into a big, easy smile, the kind you'd give a neighbor stopping by unannounced. "Frank," she said, standing up with her mimosa still in hand, arms already spreading for a hug I did not want. "We were wondering when you'd finally show up. Come sit, we've got plenty of food." I stood on that porch, and I didn't say anything right away. Not because I had nothing to say, because I was looking. At the wicker chair, at my wife's wine, opened without asking. At Gerald down on my dock like he'd built it himself. At 9 strangers, treating my dead wife's sanctuary like a rented Airbnb. "Patricia," I said. My voice came out level. "I didn't plan it. It just came out that way, quiet and even, the way water finds its own level without anybody telling it to. What is going on here?" Not a question, really. A statement that happened to end with a question mark. She waved a hand like she was swatting away a fly. "Oh, don't be like that." Nikki said it was fine. "We needed somewhere for my sister's family to stay for the reunion, and this place has been sitting empty forever, Frank. It's practically a crime to let a house like this just gather dust." She gestured out at the lake, like she was showing me something I'd never seen before. Gorgeous water, by the way. "We've had the best week." "Nicole said it was fine," I repeated. "It'll be Nikki's one day anyway." Gerald called up from the dock, not even bothering to come up the stairs, spatula still in his hand. "Once Michael inherits it. So really, we're basically—" And then he laughed. "That's the moment I need you to understand, the way you'd understand a photograph if you looked at it long enough. Not the wine, not the wicker chair, not the strangers on my grass, the laugh. Gerald Voss's easy, comfortable, completely unbothered laugh. The laugh of a man who has already decided, somewhere deep in his own accounting, that whatever I built already belongs, in some quiet, permanent way, to the Voss family. And that the funniest thing happening at that moment was the idea that the old man standing on the porch steps might actually do something about it. One of the strange women on the grass giggled. A kid on the dock yelled cannonball and did exactly that. Patricia sipped her mimosa and watched me over the rim of the glass, waiting to see if I'd sit down and join the party like a good sport. I let the laugh finish, didn't cut it off early. Let it run its course the way you let a man talk until he's said his piece. Then I walked up onto that porch, past Patricia, into the kitchen where the wine sat open on the counter, and I picked up the bottle and looked at it for a long moment. "This was my wife's," I said, quiet enough that the porch went still around me. "She's been gone 4 years. Nobody touches this wine." I set it back down. Nobody. I turned and looked at Patricia, and I said what I'd come to say. Slow and even. "I'm going to say this once. This is my house. My name on the deed. I don't know what Nicole told you, and I don't know what you told yourselves on the drive up here, but I need every person on this property and every vehicle in my driveway gone in 1 hour." Patricia's smile faltered for the first time. "Frank, come on, we drove 4 hours." 1 hour, I said again, and I looked at her long enough that she understood I meant it down to the minute. Then I walked back through my own kitchen, out my own front door, and I did not slam it. I pulled it shut behind me the way you close a door on a conversation that's finished, because telling them to leave was only the floor. What came next was the ceiling, and Patricia Voss had absolutely no idea how high it went. I got in my truck and drove into the little town center, pulled into a coffee shop parking lot, and sat there with the engine off, hands on the wheel, letting my heart rate come back down to something reasonable. Then I called my son. Michael picked up on the second ring. "Hey Dad, everything okay?" "No," I said, "but I need you to answer something before I explain anything else." A pause. I could hear him straighten up wherever he was. Okay, did you or Nicole give Patricia a key to the lake house? Silence, the kind that goes on a beat too long. Nicole did, he finally said. Months ago. Her mom wanted to check on it while we were both slammed at work. Water the plants, that kind of thing. I didn't think twice about it. Did either of you say she could invite her whole extended family up for a reunion? No. His voice tightened right up. Dad, what's going on? I told him. All of it, in order, the vehicles, the wicker chair, Diane's wine, Gerald on the dock, 9 strangers on the property I'd kept untouched for 4 years out of respect for his mother. There was a long silence on the line when I finished, longer than the first one. Nicole didn't know it went this far, Michael said quietly. I need to call her. You do that, I said. But I need you to hear something else first. This isn't about Nicole. She trusted her mother, and that's not a crime. But I need you to know I'm going to handle this the right way, and I need you to trust me the same way I've always trusted you. Okay, Dad. His voice had gone lower, steadier, the voice of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. Okay. I hung up and called my attorney, a man named Walter Diaz, who's handled my business and my estate for 22 years, ever since I opened the second shop. Walter doesn't do small talk, and he didn't do any that day either. I told him everything while it was still fresh, every detail in order. Frank, he said when I finished, how long do you think this has been going on? I don't know yet, I said, but I'm going to find out. Get me a timeline, Walter said, and don't say another word to anyone about what you're planning until I've built the file. I called Carol Reyes next, still sitting in that parking lot with my coffee going cold. Told her to hold the listing for the Buffalo family, just for a week, no explanation needed. Carol's worked with me long enough to know that when I say hold, I mean hold, and I've got a reason. I drove back to Erie that afternoon without going back to the cabin. Didn't need to. Patricia had texted Michael by then, some clipped message about how she didn't appreciate being ambushed in a house her daughter had every right to be in, which told me everything about how she saw this whole situation. Not as an intrusion she'd been caught in, as an inconvenience she'd been interrupted during. 6 days later, Walter called me with what he'd found, and it was worse than I expected. Carol had gone by the cabin on a routine check and found mail. Not my mail. A magazine subscription addressed to Patricia and Gerald Voss at my address. A renewal notice from a wine club, same address. A parcel delivery slip for something Patricia had apparently ordered and had shipped straight to my cabin like it was her own home. Frank, Walter said, and there was a weight in his voice I didn't like. This wasn't a one-time reunion. Somebody's been treating this place like a second home for a while. I sat with that for a long moment. How long? I asked. Does it take to get a wine club membership transferred to a new address? Longer than a weekend, Walter said. Here's what I want you to understand about the next 2 weeks, because every piece of it matters. I did not call Patricia. I did not call Gerald. I did not even discuss it further with Michael beyond telling him I had it handled and asking him to give me some room to work. What I did instead was quiet, and it was permanent. First, a formal notice, drafted by Walter, sent by certified mail to Patricia and Gerald Voss at their home address in New Jersey, stating plainly that the property on Lakeshore Drive was private, that any future entry without my written permission would be treated as trespassing under New York law, and that any personal property left on the premises would be considered abandoned. No warning call, no heads up through Michael, just the letter, sealed and sent. Second, I called Carol back and told her we were moving forward with the Buffalo family after all. She had the lease signed within the week, $2,800 a month, move-in date, the 1st of July. I made sure the locks were changed before they arrived. Every single one. And third, the part I hadn't told even Walter I was thinking about until that phone call in the coffee shop parking lot. I decided I was done leaving that cabin sitting there as an open question for anybody to answer for themselves. I told Walter I wanted to sell it. There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can hear a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about a conversation. Frank, that's the house Diane loved. That's exactly why I'm doing it, I said. Diane spent 30 years building a life with me that she trusted would be respected after she was gone. She would not have wanted her wine opened by strangers, and her chair sat in by people counting the days until I died. I want it sold, clean, best offer, and I want the proceeds put somewhere Patricia Voss can never touch them with a mimosa in her hand. Tell me what you're thinking, Walter said. So I told him, and when I finished, there was a long quiet on the line, and then Walter said, in the voice of a man who's practiced law for over 30 years and doesn't surprise easily anymore, Frank, that might be the most thorough thing you've ever asked me to build. Can you do it? I can have the framework ready in 2 weeks. Good, I said. Get started. Here's what Walter built over those 2 weeks, piece by piece. And I want you to hear all of it because the audience deserves to know exactly how a quiet man fights back. Carol had the cabin listed within 4 days. Good photos, honest description, priced fairly. By day 10, she had 2 solid offers, and I took the cleaner one, a retired couple from Rochester who wanted a quiet place on the water, closing in 30 days. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon, and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled since the day I walked onto that porch and saw Diane's chair being used by a stranger. The proceeds went into a trust. Not a simple one. Walter spent the better part of 2 weeks drafting it, with a level of precision that made his own paralegal raise her eyebrows, he told me later. Michael would inherit everything, completely, fully, without a dollar taken away, because none of this was ever about punishing my son. But the trust carried one clause, written in plain, unambiguous language, stating that if Michael's spouse wished to have any legal claim on or access to any asset held within it, she would be required to sign a postnuptial agreement first, drafted by her own independent counsel, signed voluntarily, on record. Not because I blamed Nicole. Because I had watched her mother stand on my dead wife's porch and calculate a future that hadn't been offered to her, and I understood in that moment that love left unprotected is just an open door for whoever feels entitled enough to walk through it. Walter also set up a second structure, a fund held separately and specifically for any future grandchildren Michael and Nicole might have, designed to bypass both of them entirely if it ever needed to, going straight to those children's education and their start in life, untouchable by anyone standing above them making decisions those kids never asked for. I thought about that fund for a long time. About children who didn't exist yet, about building something meant to outlast me by 2 generations. Diane would have loved that idea. She always thought further ahead than I did, even at the very end. I told no one, not Michael, not my brother Ted, who called twice that week and got the same steady, ordinary Frank on the line both times. I went to my Tuesday poker game. I mowed my own lawn. I was the same man I had always been because I was. 2 weeks after signing the sale papers, I packed a bag and flew to Charleston, South Carolina, a city Diane had always wanted to see, and we'd never quite gotten around to. I stayed 5 days, walked the Battery every morning while the air was still cool, ate well, read on a bench by the water, slept without setting an alarm for the first time in longer than I could remember. And I sent 2 postcards, one to Michael, and one, and I'll admit this one I enjoyed writing most, addressed to Michael and Nicole's house, to the whole family, a photograph of Rainbow Row on the front, and on the back, a simple line. Taking some time, back soon. Hope everyone's well, Dad. I want you to picture what that postcard did in Nicole's hands. The cabin had already sold. The man who sold it had said nothing, explained nothing, argued nothing with anyone, and was somewhere in South Carolina sending pictures of pastel houses, like a man completely at peace with the world. No confrontation, no indication of what was coming. Just a retired machinist enjoying his vacation. That postcard was its own message, and Nicole, who is considerably sharper than her mother, understood that the moment she turned it over in her hands. She just didn't yet know how deep it went. I came home on a Sunday. Monday morning I called Michael. How was the trip? He asked. Good for the soul, I said. Listen, I need everybody together this Saturday. My place. You, Nicole, and I'll have Walter there too. A pause, longer this time. Is everything okay, Dad? Everything's fine, I said. Better than fine. I've got some things I want you both to hear together, directly, at the same time. No confusion, no second-hand version of it. We'll be there, he said, and I could hear in his voice a young man running through possibilities he couldn't quite name yet. Saturday came the way important days always do, looking exactly like an ordinary one until you're standing inside it. I was up at 6, coffee going, the house quiet the way I've always liked a house to be. Walter arrived at 1, 30 minutes early, set his briefcase on my dining table, and looked over his documents one more time with the satisfaction of a man who's built something he's proud of. "How do you want to play it?" he asked. "Straight," I said. "Walk them through it. No speeches, no editorializing. Just the papers, exactly as written. And you?" "I'll sit at the head of the table," I said, "and let the paperwork do the talking." Michael and Nicole arrived at 1:30. Michael in a work shirt, Nicole with her hair pulled back, both of them carrying that careful, watchful energy of people trying to read a room they don't have enough information to understand yet. Nicole's eyes went straight to Walter's briefcase, then to Walter, then to me. I smiled, and I meant it. "Come in. Sit down." We took our seats, Walter at one end with his papers, me at the other, Michael and Nicole across from each other in between. "Thank you both for coming," I said. "I asked Walter here because I've made some decisions about my estate, and I want you to hear them together, directly. No surprises down the road. Walter, go ahead." What happened over the next 35 minutes was not a scene. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody pointed a finger. It was a 63-year-old lawyer reading documents at a dining room table in Erie, Pennsylvania, and it was more permanent than any argument could ever be. Walter started with the sale of the cabin, confirmed, closed, proceeds received in full. He slid the closing statement to the center of the table. Michael looked at it. Nicole looked at it. Neither one spoke. Then the trust. Walter walked through it exactly the way he does everything, without rushing, in the plain language of a man who knows clarity is the most powerful tool a document can offer. Michael's inheritance, laid out complete and generous, not a dollar diminished, because his father had never once considered punishing him. I watched Nicole's shoulders come down, just slightly, as whatever weight she'd been carrying since that postcard arrived started to ease. Then Walter turned the page and read the postnuptial clause aloud, word for word, and the room went as quiet as any room I have ever sat in. I watched Nicole's face move through three things in the space of about 4 seconds. First, shock, the real kind, the kind that arrives before you've had time to arrange your face around it. Second, recognition, something shifting behind her eyes as she understood that what had happened on that porch in June hadn't just been witnessed and remembered, it had been translated into paper, into legal language, into something sitting on a table in front of her that she hadn't known existed 30 seconds earlier. And third, and this is the one that told me everything I needed to know about Nicole Kowalski, something that looked an awful lot like relief. The complicated, difficult relief of a woman who's been carrying something she couldn't name out loud and just had somebody else name it for her. She looked at me. I held her gaze, steady, no anger in it, no score being settled. Just a look that said, "I see you. I saw what happened, and I did what I had to do." She looked back down at the table. Michael had read the clause twice. I could tell by the way his eyes tracked back to the start of it. When he looked up at me, his face had gone through its own quiet rearrangement, not toward anger, not toward taking sides, but toward something I recognized, because I'd felt it myself once, standing in my own machine shop at 28 years old. Understanding for the first time that this life was serious and you had to build accordingly. He understood the clause wasn't an accusation against his wife. It was a wall built around their shared future by a man who'd watched somebody else's mother count that future out loud before it belonged to her. Walter turned to the last document, the Fund for Future Grandchildren, and explained it plainly. Fully funded, designated exclusively for children who didn't exist yet, structured to bypass Michael and Nicole entirely, if it ever needed to, going straight to those kids, clean and untouchable, already waiting. Nicole made a small sound, not quite a word, the sound that escapes a person when something reaches a place they weren't guarding. She pressed her lips together and looked down. And Michael reached across the table and put his hand over hers, right there, without hesitation, without looking at me for permission. He just reached over and covered his wife's hand and held it. I looked at my son in that moment, and something settled in my chest that had been unsettled for weeks. Whatever conversations were waiting for Michael and Nicole in the car on the way home, in the weeks ahead, my boy was going to be all right. He didn't have to choose between protecting his marriage and understanding his father. I'd made sure of that. That was the whole point of every quiet decision I'd made. Walter closed his briefcase with a soft click and looked at me. I nodded. Then I pushed my chair back, stood up, and I looked around that table, at Walter, who'd built this with me and executed every piece of it, at my son, who had his mother's steadiness and more quiet strength in him than he'd ever had reason to use, and at Nicole, who was looking at me with an expression I don't have one clean word for, complicated and raw, and more honest than anything I'd seen from her since this whole thing began. I built everything you just saw on that table, I said, slow, because true things deserve to be heard at the pace they're meant to travel. Every dollar of it, with my hands and my time and 30 years of a marriage I don't get back. I built it for you, Michael, and for whatever comes after you, and I protected it the same way, because that's what building something actually means. Not punishing anybody, just refusing to leave the door open for whoever decides they're entitled to walk through it. I picked my jacket up off the back of the chair. Now who wants dinner? Walter stayed. Michael squeezed my shoulder on his way to the kitchen, that same solid grip that says everything without a single word attached to it. Nicole paused at the doorway, turned back, looked at me with that same complicated honesty, and nodded. Small, real. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything a man needs. My brother Ted called that evening. How'd it go? He asked. Exactly the way it was supposed to, I said. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at my own backyard, ordinary and quiet in the June evening, completely indifferent to whatever the Voss family had assumed belonged to them. Nicole nodded on her way out. The real kind. And Patricia? Ted asked. When she hears, I said, she'll hear all of it through Nicole. The sale, the trust, the clause, the fund for grandchildren that don't exist yet, and she'll sit in her kitchen in New Jersey and understand exactly what all of it means. And then she'll think about a man who sold a house out from under her assumptions, flew to Charleston, sent a postcard of Rainbow Row, and came home and called a family meeting, all without ever once raising his voice. And what's she going to conclude? Ted asked. I set my coffee mug down. That the afternoon she sat in my late wife's chair and let her husband laugh about my inheritance was the most expensive afternoon of her entire life. The fund is sitting there now, waiting patiently, the way well-built things do. Nicole signed the postnuptial agreement 6 weeks after that Saturday, independent counsel, voluntary, on record, in her own hand. Patricia Voss has not set foot in New York State since. And somewhere in New Jersey, a woman who once sat in a dead woman's chair and called herself family sits with her own morning coffee and thinks about a family meeting she was never invited to, papers she'll never see, and a future for her own grandchildren that she has absolutely no way of touching.